Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with an update to the Waste Not deck that I'm working on. Sad story, but I mean, this is how a lot of decks start, is with an idea and then you start fine-tuning them to an actual deck. Sad story is I end up cutting Waste Not to the sideboard. I don't think that Waste Not is that playable right now in the Pioneer format. It's still a great sideboard card because of cards like Baby Jace and Smuggler's Copter and the plethora of other madness and discard type cards that I think you can bring in versus you can bring Waste Not in versus those decks. But as a main card, it is just very awkward. I think you need more cards like Dark Deal or more cards like Burning Inquiry to really make the card shine. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot of those in the Pioneer format. However, 8 Rack, or in this case, 8 Affliction, seems like a pretty good strategy. I've played a few games with this, and it does a great job of ripping out your opponent's hands, and then you're both ending up top decking, and then you get some residual damage in with the list that I have before you. So this is my new take on like a discard-based deck. This still has a lot of improvements to do because there's just a wide card pool in the format. I'm even looking at things like Chandra that could go in this to just be that other like rack type effect once your opponent's out of cards to start taxing them 2 damage per turn. But right now, what I have before you is just a traditional 8 rack type build. In this particular build, is running Shrieking Affliction. It says at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, they lose 3 life. And then Davriel, Rogue Shadowmage. So at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, Davriel, Rogue Shadowmage does 2 damage to them. So this is going to be taxing your opponents if they're out of cards in their hand. So the mana base is a lot easier on this particular one than it was even on the Waste Not, because there's no real point to be running the Gyrite Sanitariums without Waste Not. So we're going to be running the Castle Locthwains instead, and I'm thinking about going up to 4 of Castle Locthwains because they're that good at drawing you cards to then make your opponents discard cards. But right now it's just the 3 of, and we're going to be running Canyon Sloughs because this one's also really good at cycling and then getting you another card to either remove one of your opponent's permanents or make them discard a card. Other than that, it's just going to be Blood Crypts, Dragonskull Summits, and Swamps, running 21 of them because you do want to hit your land drops to get to your 3. And even having excess mana in this deck isn't horrible, but it's definitely not as good as it was in the Waste Not, where you're drawing cards and then be casting again. So, onto the discard cards, we have a full package of Thoughtseize and a full package of Vicious Rumors. I think both of these are really good. Thoughtseize, of course, is going to get a particular card out of your opponent's hand. Vicious Rumors is going to tax them a life, and also they just discard a card. Vicious Rumors was better with like Deathrite Shaman because it gave fuel in the graveyard for you to use. However, I don't think that running Deathrite Shaman is the right route to go in this particular list. It could be another card that could tax your opponent per turn, but then the mana base gets a little bit more wonky with running Overgrown Tombs because you probably do want those to exile creatures out of the graveyard. It's still an option, even possibly in the sideboard, running the Deathrite Shaman, but it's definitely not a must, and not in this first iteration of the 8 rack deck. So yeah, we could definitely have some room for this in the sideboard if you so choose. Then we're going to run 3 Collective Brutalities. These are just good at ripping out instant sorceries. They can also do 2 damage and gain 2 life if you just top deck them and you need to do more damage to your opponent. Because you can see that all of our discard cards have a little bit of a damage attached to them, like Vicious Rumors and then Collective Brutality. And then our next one being Yarok Fenlurker. This one too is just a creature then they have to remove. They exile some through their hand, and they can actually be a threat late game, whether it be attacking it for 2 or 3. You're probably wishful thinking to be attacking in more than that, but it still is something that does have at least a pumpable ability and ripped out a card from your opponent's hand. So this is still sort of a threat in a basically no card situation. Oh, speaking of which too, there's the one other card I thought in the mana base, Mutavault. Mutavault's a card that I am thinking might go in this list. I was worried just that you have to hit like your double black on time with this deck a lot of times, or at least your black red. But I'm thinking Mutavault might just be a perfect addition for this deck as another way to then attack in for 2 damage, attack in for 2 damage. Again, I'll have to mess around with the numbers and see if it actually works, but that's another way to get in. So that's kind of the theory of this deck, is you're just going to be chipping at their life total. The other discard is going to be in the form of Plaguecrafter. This is going to take care of a creature, or if they don't have a creature or a planeswalker, they have to discard a card. And then Kolaghan's Command, which is going to force your opponent to discard a card or destroy an artifact or do 2 damage or return a creature. And that's why we do have like the Yarok Fenlurkers and the Plaguecrafters, so that has some synergy. And then last but not least, we have Rakdos' Return. I don't know if this wants to be a 4 of in the deck because it scales really well. If you have excess mana and your opponent is a card drawing deck, Rakdos' Return is a way to then get them back down to where you need for the Shrieking Afflictions and the Davriel to do damage. So I've got a 2 of right now. This could be a more powerful card. We'll have to wait and see how it actually adds up. The control elements are very weak in this particular one, or not very weak. We do have Plaguecrafters and Kolaghan Span, but I mean we don't have a lot of them. So we have Dreadbore and Murderous Rider. I think Dreadbore is slightly better than Murderous Rider, other than Murderous Rider can then be cast to attack. But Dreadbore is right where you want it after like a Thoughtseize or a Shrieking Affliction. It gives you something to do on turn 2. And this is another thing I'll have to mess around with the numbers, if Dreadbore's better or if Murderous Rider's better. There, of course, are some other cards, too, that I thought about in this deck, like Goblin Dark Dwellers has some pretty good synergy with, like, Kolaghan's Command. But at that point, I think you need to be running some other cards that hit with Goblin Dark Dwellers. And like I said, Chandra, Angrath, lots of options you can use as your finisher, but so far I want to keep this as streamlined as possible. If we go over to the sideboard, right now I'm running 3 Duresses, 2 Fatal Pushes, 4 Waste Nots, because I think they will be good in the matchups that they're good. They're going to be really good against those matchups, Smuggler Copters and et al., those type of things. The Waste Not is going to shine and get you a lot of card advantage, but it's not a main card right now in the Pioneer format. Running 2 Crypt Incursions, this could definitely be where the Deathrite Shaman could come into effect. Deathrite Shaman could exile creatures with green mana. It's kind of awkward though. This is just a one time you get rid of all of their cards in graveyard. This I'm just assuming for specific matchups that do use creatures in the graveyard, Crypt Incursions can be a good card. Same thing with Kalitas, Traitor of Ghet. Again, this could be another option. There are plenty of things in the sideboard. And speaking of graveyard, still, yet again, Ashiok Dreamrender. I bring these in versus like the Dig Through Time and the Treasure Cruise matchups because then you exile those and they can't. There are some tutor decks as well where they're tutoring specific cards. Ashiok takes care of those, so I think it's good as a 2 of. And Slaughter Games, depending on the meta, if it becomes even more of a combo ridden format, Slaughter Games is the perfect card for this. One other card that I thought I'd mention that you should consider putting in your sideboard is Ugin. The main reason is Leyline of Sanctity is in this format, and I've already been shut down by Leyline of Sanctity with this deck when they just, win game 1, bring in Leylines, and then I can't target them with anything. So that is a feels bad thing. Ugin allows you to have some sort of action versus Leyline of Sanctity. It's also a card that can definitely get you the card advantage. We're talking about the 6 mana Ugin out of War of the Spark. That is the one. You can run the 8 mana Ugin, but I think at that point from Fate Reforged, that's a little bit wishful thinking with a 21 land deck. So there you have it. There's my first iteration of an 8-rack Pioneer deck. To give you an example of how this runs, this isn't the best example. This is the last game I played. This is versus a blue-white deck, and we'll just kind of run through how this game went. And so again, for a while before I can start streaming, this is going to be how I'm going to show gameplay, is just by going through replays and recapping how they went. I'm going to try to set aside some time on Tuesdays and Thursdays for live streams, a little bit of promotion before we get to that. I'm actually out of tickets right now on MTGO, and I don't want to pump too much money back into it. So all the money that I want to be pumping into it needs to come from paper sales. I'm not going to, splurge into MTGO again just to have me rage quit it like I did a couple years ago. So if you do want to see more content, head over to, I'll try to link in the description below, a place you can come support us and buy paper cards from us, and that way I can convert it back into digital cards and play a lot more decks. Like, this is another list that I might go into Liliana's if I wanted to pay 45 tickets per Liliana, because there is a pretty sweet card out of War of the Spark called Liliana's Triumph that, isn't it called Liliana's Triumph? Something like that, where if you control Liliana, they have to discard a card, and then you make them sack a creature. I think that's a very good 2-for-1 for 2 mana, and that's the type of card that I would like to play around with. But like I said, I cashed out of MTGO, spend it on other stuff. Don't want to go down this road again right off the bat without any, know that there's a need or a want for content for this. So anyway, let's get to going with the gameplay. So this hand is perfect. It's got a red source, it's got a black source, it's got a Thoughtseize and a Shrieking Affliction. So you got your win condition. You got a way to rip out their first card. You got a way to rip out a card with Yarok Fenlurker. And so we will just hop down the Canyon Slough because we don't need Thoughtseize playing on turn 2 gives you more information. We don't need the Shrieking Affliction out yet, and we can cast both of them on the same turn. So that's the route I decided to go. We'll lead with the Thoughtseize. This is also something that's really cool about this deck over Waste Not, is sometimes you're like, I don't want to cast the Thoughtseize until Waste Not's out. And then you end up missing a card like Search for Azcanta that comes down. So I'm thinking Shrieking Affliction is just better than that, because you can fire off your Thoughtseizes and any other discard before these sort of spells come out. So again, I think that's that little difference makes all the difference for this archetype. So we get the Search for Azcanta, and you can see that our opponent doesn't have anything except for a few of the ways to get one card, Opt and Anticipate, a counterspell, and a Detention Sphere. So of course, you could have made the argument for Detention Sphere, but we didn't see any white mana. And Detention Sphere is not going to do a lot at the moment with just one Shrieking Affliction. We have other ways to just beat them down. So taking the Search for Azcanta, which is a residual draw card, and something we'll be filling up their graveyard, is definitely the right pick. All right, so opponent goes back on and goes for an Opt end of turn, and puts out a white source and doesn't do anything. So we do hit our third land drop, which is awesome, but I think I'll just run out the Yarok's Fenlurker, and our opponent decides to Anticipate to give them more options of what they can discard, and then they end up exiling a Silumgar Scorn. So one of their counterspells is gone. They're still desperate for blue mana. They find their blue mana now, and now I can start chipping away at them with my Yarok Fenlurkers. So we'll attack first, and one damage is one damage, and then we'll head off with another one. Either our opponent has to counter or discard another one, and they end up getting rid of their other Silumgar Scorn instead of countering it. So I don't know what was up with that. Oh yeah, because they wanted the Detention Sphere. So I think this is a pretty meh play by my opponent, because creatures are easy to take care of with a blue-white control, whereas enchantments are a little bit more tricky. My opponent decides to go to Detention Sphere. Maybe their thinking is that they can catch back up with Sphinx's Revelation, or Dig Through Times, or Treasure Cruises, or whatever else is in their deck. But I think they just going after Shrieking Affliction would have been the better play there, and then wait for some sort of Supreme Verdict removal. So now I'm getting kind of frustrated that I have 2 removal spells against nothing at the moment. No targets with Teferis. But Shrieking Affliction is now online after I Kolaghan's Command to the face. My opponent's on to 14 and still hasn't found any answers. They threw away both their counterspells and Detention Sphere, so they don't have an answer for these Shrieking Afflictions. So now I just got to keep the pressure on with keeping them, in discard range. And they're going to Anticipate, find another land. I think my opponent kind of played this a little bit bad, unless they're going for like a Sphinx's Revelation big play, so they want to hit land drops. But just keeping those lands in hand would have kept them above Shrieking Affliction. I guess I could rip one out and put them back down to 1, but it gives them more options to discard those lands rather than relevant things if they have in their hand. So now I'm going to fire off another Kolaghan's Command, make them discard the card, and that's perfectly lethal. So 2 plus when they go to their upkeep, they'll be down to 6. They'll lose 6 life and then just lose the game. So again, not the best showing of how this deck runs, but it gives you an idea of how quickly you can get rid of their hand, you can apply the pressure, and it's a very few short turns if they can't get back up to that count in their hand, where the Shrieking Afflictions can just take over the game. So again, first iteration of the deck, I'll have the link in the description below for the deck list, and we'll still mess around with this. This is giving me a lot of hope for like just Rakdos control, like kind of a Skred variant. Thinking of Skred, I think that sort of like a Skred Red, how it works in Modern, is actually quite playable in Pioneer, with like Chandra at the helm of like the Chandra, both Chandras, like the one that came out of was it War of the Spark, the one of Core 2020 that does damage to multiple creatures or one creature, and then gives that emblem per turn, or just the Chandra Torch of Defiance. I think both of those work very, very well, and even other Chandra, the other Chandra that came out of Core 2020, can actually cast converted mana cost 3 or less, or 2 or less, I can't remember which one it is, from your graveyard, and can be that residual card advantage there too. So Chandra Tribal seems pretty good in this format, and it's going to have a different axis of how this format runs. Like typically in the further back you go in Magic, you have more of an attrition war, where even like a deck like this might not even work in Standard at the moment, because there's just lots of threats that can come down that you either have to answer or you just lose in a few turns, and they can eke out card advantage with those things. Those type of decks just get blown out by like cards like Supreme Verdict or the big control spells, whereas a discard-based deck does very well against the decks that have those big board wipes, because you don't care about those things. So Magic has these different axes on how it works. How one deck can be super good in Modern and might not even be playable in Standard is how it works when that's how metas are born. So depending on the meta and depending on how Pioneer starts to shape up, we'll definitely adjust accordingly. And I think there's a lot of options. What I'm loving about Pioneer right now is it doesn't seem to be like there doesn't seem to be the Tarmogoyfs that just are or the birthing pods, the things that are just strictly better. I guess birthing pods banned in modern than their counterparts. And there also doesn't seem to be a problem with like 8th edition, where there had a lot of degenerate cards that, like, even Worship is an annoying card, or Blood Moon, or like things that just shut down decks. These hate cards that particularly to shut off strategies and become annoying because you have to play around them. And then, of course, there's not a lot of like Simian Spirit Guide type stuff to accelerate the mana. So I'm loving this format so far. I've played a lot of games. There was a matchup with Waste Not where it went to my opponent milling both times with it was energy. So it was Oko, Teferi, Othanissa, and they ended up going to mill by the time it was done because we just kept answering each other's stuff. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll keep working with this video this deck. I'm liking Grixis, Jund, Rakdos for kind of my flavor for the more spiky decks, but I'm definitely going to be brewing around a bunch of different cards. Just give you a short list right now I'm working on. I want to build the Nahab out of War of the Spark, See the Unwritten out of Khans of Tarkir, Sage of Hours out of Journey to Nyx, Ilharg the Razeboar out of War of the Spark, Surok out of Dragons of Tarkir, the green one, the mono green one. Night Howler. Night Howler looks pretty fun with the Graveyard Reanimation strategy. God Pharaoh's Gift seems like it has a lot of cool cards to work with, and some of my old favorites like Agent of Fates. So I'm just, I'm just talking to people and writing down things as I go. There seems to be like a tooth and nail strategy that seems pretty good with See the Unwritten. And what makes that different from like Aetherix Marvel is you counter your Aetherix Marvel, you still, by the time you hit 5 mana, 6 mana, you can start hard casting everything. So, good old Atarka and Xenagos is back. A lot of these like best of rogue deck builders, what I like to say the greatest hits from the Rogue Deck Builder channel can now be rebrewed in Pioneer. Man, what do we have? Like Blast of Genius or Blast of Worms, where you use Blast of Genius in the Worm, the 11 mana spell. There's just so much things that so many things can be brewed in this format, can be upgraded, some of those wacky decks, and it's just, you can tell by my enthusiasm. I'm loving this format. I'm loving all the ideas that are going around. Even at my local game store, what people are brewing is pretty cool. We have people that are just running like mono red, sure, and mono green, and and Soul Artifact and things, and Eldrazi and things like that. But there's definitely some ideas that are being pushed around that are outside the box, and combinations of cards that just can never see play in Modern. Maybe even some that have some people coming up from Commander, like I played these combos in Commander. Let's see if we actually make them in Pioneer. So again, Pioneer is very interesting because there were cards like Nahab. Nahab out of War of the Spark just doesn't have the support. There's not enough wheel type stuff for Nahab to really work. But when you bring it onto Pioneer, it seems to be there a lot of things can work with it. Sage of Hours is another one. Sage of Hours doesn't have a lot of ways to put +1 counters during that time period. Now there are so many sets that was the focal point of the set was +1 counters. So Sage of Hours looks so much better than when it existed in the Journey. And it's just all these strategies that aren't playable for Modern because of how Modern with Path to Exiles and Lightning Bolts and just these answers that are so good and these threats that are so good push out all these what I call like sub threats or minor threats or things like that would see the light of day if they had an opportunity to have a little bit of breathing room, and that's something that Modern never gives, is breathing room. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. I'm rambling, but we're gonna get on to some other deck techs. I'll probably have more out today. Maybe a list of cards, a top 10 list of cards I want to brew with from the Frontier, and we'll actually, or from Pioneer, and we'll actually get to that. And I haven't ignored Standard. Yes, I have. I don't know. I said I'd brew all the cards on my top 10 list from Standard, but Standard's awful right now with Oko, and I don't know. It's not as bad as I say, but I just have no desire to play Standard at the moment. Pioneer. So if you want to see more Pioneer content, definitely come check out the cards we have for sale, and that way we can pump some money into this and we can have some fun. Anyway, Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder, thanks for watching.